The Necrom chapter brings two powerful new companions, Azandar the Arcanist and Sharp as Night the Warden, into ESO. Now, I've spent the past several days testing every combination of gear, skills, and traits to come up with the best companion builds for these new combat allies. So whether you want to add a new tank, a healer, a DPS, or something completely unique to your companion's roster, I've got you covered in this video. And before we jump into things, just a quick note that I do have builds for all the previous companions as well, going back to last year's High Isle chapter and the Blackwood chapter before that. I'll have links to those build guides in the description if you want to check them out. Now let's start with Azandar the Arcanist, who I think may be one of the most powerful companions in the game moving forward. This obviously has a lot to do with his Arcanist skill set. And this companion is going to be especially good for supporting roles, specifically tank builds and healers. Let's start off with looking at Azandar as a tank build, where he's going to offer a lot of buffs and debuffs, named debuffs specifically like minor vulnerability and major vulnerability, plus solid options for healing and his own survival using damage shields, which are another Arcanist specialty. And Azandar is actually the only companion who has a taunt as part of his skill set, meaning you could use other combinations other than one-handed shield if you want, though I did choose to use a shield in this case for the extra armor. And speaking of armor, as a tank build for companions, you want to definitely focus on picking up as many heavy armor pieces as possible. Obviously, the more armor your companion has, the less damage they'll take from bosses, and they'll be able to survive that much easier. Now, as far as traits, I am using a fair amount of vigorous traits. This is going to increase your companion's max health. That's definitely important to focus on. And then I also have some quicken traits thrown into the mix as well. That's going to reduce Azandar's cooldowns on all of his abilities, letting him cast those skills more frequently. Speaking of skills, we're going to start with Scathing Rune. This comes from his tank skill line called Quill Knight. And like I said, this is a very good option. It's also unique in that it gives minor maim. So I think this is actually better than using the one-hand and shield taunt or the undaunted taunt for companions for that reason. Then we're using the augmented ward skill. This is a damage shield. It now absorbs up to 25% of his max health, so it's a rather large shield, and it also does magic damage back, which is very good. Next up, we have Zone of Recuperation, a very unique heal and buff effect. This gives good healing over time and 150 health, magicka, and stamina to himself and all allies in the group. So this is a really great ability too. In addition to that, we've thrown in Shields of Erudition. This comes from his healing skill line, and it's very good because it not only gives him a damage shield, it also gives up to 2 allies damage shields as well. So a lot of bang for your buck with this particular skill too. And finally, you do want some type of burst heal. I think on any type of tank companion, when they get in trouble, they can heal themselves. So Triptych Physic, this also comes from his healing skill line, does 3 quick heals. And then let's talk a little bit about his ultimate, Tentacular Eruption. I think one of the best companion ultimates in the game because it gives major vulnerability. That's a 10% increase of damage taken to all the targets in the area. This also knocks enemies up and stuns them, so it's very, very nice. So overall, yes, I think Azandar makes a great tank companion. He is very unique in that, again, he doesn't have a lot of damage reduction, so you're going to need to have probably 2 damage shields at least to help him survive. But again, the other really nice thing about him is his unique buffs and debuffs. As I said earlier, if you want even more utility, you could also run Tendrils of the Colorless Sea, which is one of his DPS skills that gives minor vulnerability. So you can stack minor and major with Azandar, which is really cool. Moving on next to Azandar as a healer companion, again, I think is really great. He does well, like I said, as a support role because of all of his unique buffs, as well as his access to debuffs. So there's many different ways you could set this up. Now for a pure healer build, you will want a companion restoration staff, and then you will want to focus on light armor due to the companion light armor passives. And I've gone with mostly quicken traits here, as I feel this is the best way to really stack heal over times effectively with your companion healer. Now, speaking of the skills here, just wanted to showcase the unique passive here for Azandar, which decreases his ability cooldowns. Another great reason why I think he is a fantastic support and healing companion. But in terms of the active abilities that we're going to use, Shields of Erudition, which I mentioned earlier, comes from the healing skill line, and this does 3 total damage shields. So that's a lot of protection for you and the group. Zone of Recuperation we've used on the tank build as well. Again, this is a unique heal over time and recovery buff that's going to stack with everything else. It is area of effect, so make sure he is close enough to you or that you're moving close to him so that you get that benefit. Triptych Physic is our burst heal. I know the tooltip is low, but remember this hits 3 times very quickly. He can use this to heal himself or your group. And then we're running 2 powerful restoration staff abilities. Rejuvenation, still a very good heal over time. You can see with our Quicken trait, we basically have 100% uptime on that. And then Mending Incantation is kind of a mini burst heal, but also gives you tons of armor when you have this effect on you. So very good healing setup overall. And then the ultimate is good for healers as well, I think, because of that debuff. That is great for utility. So that's going to be effective on this build as well. Like I said, I think Azandar is a great companion if you need a healing backup, either if you're playing solo or with a group. And remember, you can throw in more of those utility skills as needed. So think about using the Tentacle debuff for minor vulnerability. Azandar also has a unique buff for minor berserk. This is called Fate's Omen's Inspiration. This actually gives all the allies in the group minor berserk, so this is another great option for healer companions as well. Next, let's talk about Azandar as a ranged DPS, or basically a mage build. Now, this is where you see sort of the opposite side of Azandar because he is so good at support. He has more support skills than anything, so he doesn't do quite as well as a DPS build. We do have a basic damage skill, but his other damage skills from his DPS skill line are just either buffs or debuffs. So that is something to keep in mind. You'll need to include more weapon skills if you want to build Azandar as a DPS. Like I said, I think you definitely want to go with a ranged approach. This time I went with a Destruction Staff, Lightning Staff specifically. You want to focus on the aggressive trait, which increases all companion damage. And we actually want to use mostly medium armor for this companion build, which might not make total sense as a mage setup, but medium armor for companions at least has the highest passive boost to damage. So you definitely do want as many medium armor pieces as possible to get every boost to damage that you can. Now, in terms of skills here, again, we're definitely going to be looking a little bit outside of his own companion skills. But again, there are some options here. So I started with the Triune Word. That's his main damage skill. So 3 quick runes. That's pretty good single target damage. In addition, I am using Tendrils. Doesn't do a lot of upfront damage, but the fact that it does AoE minor vulnerability, so debuffing all the targets in front of him, is kind of nice, especially for grinding in AoE situations. Then Elemental Barricade for a bit of damage over time. This comes from the Destruction Staff skill line. I did throw in one other single target DPS skill, that's Starfall from the Mage's skill line. This is a powerful single target hit. It does work really good. Last skill I think is really optional, up to you. I did Shields of Erudition. The companion shields that he can do is really nice because, again, remember that shields him and the group. If you don't want to use that, feel free to throw in any other damage option. And of course, the ultimate here is nice for damage, even though it doesn't do a lot of damage itself. It does have that 10% damage bonus from major vulnerability. So like I said, in terms of a damage companion, I probably wouldn't say Azandar is the best in the game. I think there are certainly other companions that are more suited to this, but you can make this work as sort of a mage build or an elementalist. Again, as long as you're open to including skills from other skill lines and maybe even leveling up things like the Companion Mages Guild. And one last Azandar build here that I thought was really unique, and that is running Azandar as a melee support build. Now, what am I talking about here? Well, remember I said Azandar has probably the most buffs and debuffs of any companion in the game so far. So really focusing on those, trying to get those back as quickly as possible. And it's just skills that are either going to debuff enemies or lend support to the group. And here I'm specifically focused on his ultimate because I do think his Tendrils, the major vulnerability, is the best companion ultimate in the game. So I was looking for ways to get that back as quickly as possible. So there is actually a companion gear trait that does that. It's called Prolific. What the Prolific trait does is it increases ultimate generation for the companion. And as you can see, you can stack up basically everything with Prolific and you'll get a ton of ultimate generation, letting you use that major vulnerability as soon as possible. Now, I also went with heavy armor here because, again, this is going to be sort of almost a battle mage setup where he's in melee range, so he's going to need the extra armor, the extra protection. Now let's look at the skills that I've chosen, and also pay attention to the cooldown here because I have these down super low, and I'll explain how I did that in a minute. So again, Tendrils of the Colorless Sea, minor vulnerability to all targets in front of him. This lasts for 6 seconds, and I have a 5.6 second cooldown. We've got Ritual of Salvation next. This comes from the Companion Fighters Guild, and you can see this puts a rune on the ground that gives 20% damage reduction, not just to the companion, but to everybody in the circle. It says an 8-second duration and a 7.5-second cooldown. And next up, I wanted to throw in some extra protection for Azandar. Now, he doesn't have any damage reduction built into his skill line. He only has shields. So I thought this would be nice. Razor Cape gives him 20% damage reduction. You'll also be able to keep this up 100% of the time. Zone of Recuperation, we've shown this in all the other Azandar builds. It's very good, not just for the healing over time, but also for the recovery. So that's some more nice group support. And then Parallel, this is actually the last Mages Guild skill for companions. And I thought this was perfect because it's going to generate 50 ultimate every 7 seconds or so. So this combined with the Prolific trait, we're getting his ultimate back probably every 10 to 15 seconds, which again, that ultimate gives major vulnerability and an AoE stun. It's very powerful. So this is another great skill you can use if you want to get that ultimate up more frequently. Now, if you're wondering how I got the cooldown so low for this particular build without any quicken traits, it's because I'm running this new crafted set from the Necrom chapter. It's called Telvanni Efficiency, and this reduces all of your companion cooldowns by 50%. This also has a nice bonus. If your companion dies, the cost of your skills gets reduced by 8%. So the set is a little bit niche. I'm not going to use it on every single companion build because you're obviously losing a 5-piece set of your own. But I think it's nice if you really want to focus on Azandar because he does have so many good buffs and debuffs. If you want to build him as a support, and like I showed you, get that ultimate up as quickly as possible, then definitely check out this set. Let's shift gears next and talk about Sharp as Night, the new Warden companion from the Necrom chapter. And let's talk about his strengths first, which I think is going to be as a DPS build, particularly as a range setup. And I'm using him as a bow user in this particular case. Now, his strength is that all of his DPS skills actually do damage, unlike Azandar, where some of them are focused on buffs and debuffs. Sharp as Night's damage skills are basically like animal companion skills. So he's got the Cliff Racer, he's got the Fletcher Flies, and the Shulks that go underground. Fletcher Flies also apply minor vulnerability, so he's got some good damage in his toolkit, going along with that Warden theme, which I think pairs really nice with sort of like a hunter play style with the bow. So let me show you the specific gear for this one. Obviously, we're going to start with a companion bow, and the traits that we want on as many pieces as possible is aggressive for increased damage done. We also talked about how you do want medium armor, as many medium armor pieces as possible, because that also has increased damage through the passives. And then looking at those skills, Char here is the Deep Fissure clone. It's going to do damage 2 times in front of you, AoE damage with a 16-second cooldown. Then we have Swoop, which does single target magic damage. It also applies off balance, which is nice if you're focusing on heavy attacks. And then Infest is going to do magic damage over time with minor vulnerability. So that is only single target compared to Azandar, who has the AoE cone minor vulnerability. With that, we're combining 2 skills from the companion bow skill line. We've got Piercing Arrow, which is a single target damage, very strong skill, and then Viper's Bite, which is even stronger. It's single target plus dot, and then his ultimate here, Gore, is actually very strong. You can see over 30k physical damage there. And also does execute damage, so 150% bonus damage if the target's below 25% health. So really strong ultimate. So as I said, Sharp as Night, I think damage is going to be his strongest point for a companion build. Bow works out very nicely. You can do upfront, melee damage as well using either 2-hand or dual wield. That's going to be fine too. His self-healing is not quite as good, so just make sure you have somebody keeping an eye on his health if you go melee range. Next up, let's talk about Sharp as Night as a companion tank, where I think he does well enough, but not as good as some of the other tank companions. And that's mainly because he does have some damage reduction, but he has less options for damage shields. So survival is a little bit more challenging on Sharp as a tank. In terms of the equipment that you want to use for Sharp as Night, Again, heavy armor is going to be your focus. And instead of mixing in quickened, I'm going to go all vigorous for Sharp as Knight. And that's because some of his companion abilities actually scale or get better with max health, just like the Warden class. He also does not have shields like we talked about. So stacking health, I think, is going to be key, not only for his survival, but also empowering some of his abilities with the vigorous trait. Now, the first ability that we want to use here is called Sleet Mail. This comes from his tank skill line, and this did get upgraded recently and now does give him damage reduction for 6 seconds. He also gets Major Resolve, but this does not stack with player Major Resolve, unfortunately. Not sure if that's a bug, but it's not that useful for players. Then we have Provoke. Obviously, you need a taunt skill on a tank companion. You could use this, or you could go with a Frost Staff if you want. Petals of the Hunter is a nice heal skill for Sharp. This is anytime he does a light attack, he's going to heal himself and 2 allies for about 3k health, which is pretty nice. Then Perennial Bloom is an AoE heal. You can see this is just a basic heal, though. It doesn't provide any bonus effects like Azandar's AoE heal does. But luckily, he does have a very strong heal called Snow Squall. This is going to do over a 10k heal, plus additional healing over time. So this is great. Burst heal and a heal over time for survival. Make sure to use this. Gore is not as useful for a tank companion. It does do decent damage. And the stun can be helpful if you use it on crowds. Let's look at Sharp as Knight next as a companion healer build. And this is definitely a solid option for Sharp as well. By combining Restoration Staff heals along with his companion healer skill line, you'll unlock some solid healing over time potential for him and his group with a nature-focused theme. Now, as usual, for a healer setup companion, we're going to focus on light armor due to the light armor passives for increased healing, as well as the quicken trait to reduce the cooldown of those abilities. Though some soothing traits would be fine as well, as those are going to increase the healing potential of your companion. For skills, I recommend starting with the first 2 skills in the Restoration Staff skill line. That's Rejuvenation for the heal over time, and then Mending Incantation for the upfront heal, as well as the extra physical and spell resistance. Along with that, we can combine 2 of Sharp's class-based heals, one of those being Perennial Bloom. This is an AoE heal over time effect. And then we're going to combine that with the Fungal Forage skill. This is more of a burst heal. This actually does 50% more healing if you're within 8 meters of Sharp. So this is actually a very nice emergency heal with a low cooldown. Finally, for a bit of extra healing over time, I definitely recommend Reverse Entropy. This comes from the Mage's Guild skill line. It's a very powerful heal over time effect, so definitely pick that one up. And of course, he has his Gore ultimate. This does upfront physical damage, execute capability, and a knockdown. So in terms of Sharp as a healer, definitely not the strongest healing companion in the game, but he definitely will do a decent job once you combine those restoration skills with his class skills, maybe a guild skill or 2, you should be good to go. With that being said, that's going to wrap up this list of the best 7 companion builds heading into the Necrom chapter for Azandar and Sharp as Knight. Hopefully you found this information helpful. If you did, of course, do me a favor and crush that like button. It absolutely helps out the channel, and it lets YouTube know to share this video with other viewers. So that is much appreciated. If you want more information on any of the companion builds I showcased in this video, check the pinned comment in the description down below. I will have links to written guides for all of my updated companion builds. And don't forget, we have companion builds for every single companion in ESO, not just the new ones. So Isabel, Ember, Bastion, and Miri. I'll have links for their companion builds down below as well. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.